Check me out! Yes, this is so much fun! I love it!
Hey, what's the big idea?
Ooh, look at that! I really know how to dance!
Come on, babe, let's dance the night away.
Help!
Yes, this is so much fun!
Whoa, is there some kind of party going on?
Ooh, look at that! I really
No,
know how to dance!
something's not right here.
Yes, this is so much fun! I love it!
Oh, it's a carnival of creeps out there.
So I've wondered a few times to myself, how would you do visual novel combat? The most obvious answer I've seen is with turn-based RPG mechanics. And while that technically functions just fine, I was more interested in how to do combat in a visual novel that kept the visual novel aesthetic and tone intact. I'm not sure this is what I was looking for.
Huh? What was I just doing?
Hey! Wait up!
Just now, was that Sonic?
Ah, that should calm things down a bit around here. Chalk another one up for Sonic.
You know Sonic?
Of course. He was here just a moment ago.
Tell me what's happened to him. Please, tell me everything you know.
I'll happily explain everything over a plate of cucumber sandwiches.
Welcome back to more werehog sections. I know you were excited for these. In spite of how generally mediocre I find these levels to be, there are at least a couple of things in this one worth talking about. One of them is that there are a lot of breakable walls here in this first section. And we're going to break all of them, or almost all of them, to ensure we get enough Dark Force and enough rings to get that S rank, because there are a significant number of rings and a lot of Dark Force hidden behind those breakable walls. Here's a new enemy type, these shadow dogs, or whatever you'd like to call them. They're not interesting in the slightest. Sometimes they will run away from you and then charge straight at you, and the best way to deal with them that I've found is just mashing the square button. That seems to work out perfectly fine. I assume they're meant to be more difficult to fight because they charge straight at you at a reasonably fast speed. But they're not going to hurt you very much, even if their blows do connect. Anyway, we also have these red versions of the basic shadows we've already fought, and they block more often, or at least they seem to. But again, mashing the square button seems like a perfectly reasonable way to deal with them, unless they start blocking, in which case our dashing attack is the solution. You know, there was a period where I didn't know these breakable walls were here. It seems kinda silly in me in retrospect because they stick out so much. They're big stone walls. For this specific encounter, I took out the floating enemies first because, as I previously mentioned, they do act as a kind of sniper sometimes. And they use them for that purpose a lot more the more the game goes on. Anyway, we're pretty much all done with this first section of the level, and now we're on to some really basic platforming. I would call it insultingly basic platforming. There's nothing even gimmicky about it, nothing that uses the werehog special abilities. But although it is insultingly basic, with platforms that are relatively close together on what almost appears to be a flat plane, it's still a little scary. And that's because the physics for Sonic's jumping in werehog form are kind of bad. I wish I could explain better, because complaining about the controls in a game is difficult. It's something you can't really see from watching the game, you know? So someone could easily be lying about it. The rest of the design is fairly easy to see, but talking about the camera or character controls, you can't see that as well, and it's something that could easily be faked. But I did have problems controlling werehog Sonic on several of the most basic jumps in the game. The jumps are a lot less terrifying when the platforms are further apart than that. Asking for any kind of precision platforming from the player is a little bit unreasonable with these controls. And the stretchy arm platforming works fine, it's perfectly functional, and it's often quite forgiving. You just hold down the R1 button when you're near anything that's glowing. But it's also not interesting, you know? The stretchy arm platforming feels very, very automated. It feels very automated and safe, and any challenge mostly involves waiting. When you're using a stretchy arm platform, you're just waiting for the next stretchy arm platform to appear, or waiting until you climb up a sufficient amount. There's no haste involved in stretchy arm platforming. You'd have to try really hard to make it feel more safe and boring. This is one of the few instances where the box is used for any kind of puzzle solving, and no, I'm not playing on an emulator, that glitch is on the console. The ideal way to do this would be to have the stretchy platforming feel more loose and free. You know, make it so that way you have to keep swinging from pole to pole, from platform to platform using Sonic stretchy arms, or you lose your momentum and fall off. When I grab onto a pole or platform with Sonic stretchy arms, I don't want to just be safe forever and have to wait until the next thing comes. Because then the only thing pushing me to do better or giving me any kind of tension is the timer, and the timers in the werehog segments are too lenient. Far too lenient. So the platforming is completely without tension, it's just really relaxed, and I don't think that's what they were going for. And the hit detection for the stretchy arms is so lenient, you could definitely make the platforming faster with minimal problems.
There's a big door over there, but how do we open it?
You know, come to think of it, I think being too safe might be a theme for the werehog sections in this game. Not just as far as challenge is concerned, but in the overall direction. The werehog segments feel like they're too safe, like they're afraid of trying anything too outlandish or original lest they offend somebody. Which is ironic because I would call the day stages the exact opposite. The day stages are there to be unique and fast and unlike any other 3D platformer you'll ever see. And they don't care who they offend when they're doing that. I do recall, as I've already said, some people complaining about the day stages being too fast and too reckless. and the night stages are almost the opposite. And yes, I understand the night stages are meant to contradict with the day stages intentionally, but if the contrast was meant to be boring against not boring, perhaps they could have picked a better dynamic, because few people want to play through a game that's half boring because the not boring part is so good. And the not boring part really is that good, but I don't think asking for the werehog segments to be interesting is out of the question.
How do you like that, huh?
You know, I wonder why indie games, more of them, haven't tried to mimic this kind of game. I understand mid to late 90s nostalgia is the big thing, and it's been the big thing for a while, but sometime we gotta get to 2000s and mid-2000s nostalgia, right? Because when we do, I want to see people making action 3D platformers, because there were a lot of those in the 2000s and mid-2000s. And for a while it was perfectly understandable why no indie team or individual indie developer would want to touch a genre like that, because making 3D games used to be really difficult, if not impossible, for small budgets. But thanks in no small part to the Unity engine, 3D games are getting easier and easier to make. So I'm waiting on that resurgence of 3D action platformers any day now. You know, this leads into something that always struck me about the ever-evolving game industry. As technology advances more and more, a lot of older games will look lazier and lazier. Even though they weren't lazy, they were just working under different technical limitations. This is less prevalent with two-dimensional games than it is with 3D ones, because two-dimensional games are inherently more limited than three-dimensional games because they're not a 3D space. It's easy to look back on some 3D games and ask why they didn't do more with the space they had, and it was probably just limitations at the time. That also makes me wonder if anyone looks back at old 3D games and goes, hey, where are all the physics? You know, before physics were in every 3D game. I may have imagined it, but I believe there was a period where physics were only in games where the physics played a role in the design, or a role in the satisfaction of destroying enemies. For example, one of the earliest games to use ragdoll physics, Minority Report, the physics were actually part of the beat-em-up game design. That was actually an important strategy in the game, was to throw the ragdolls into each other. But now every 3D game has physics, and I'm talking every game. I mean, Kick-Ass 2? Kick-Ass 2, the video game, has physics, and so does Planet 51, the video game. You know, actually, one of the earliest examples I can think of for physics being used in game design would be Sonic 2006. The physics actually played an important role in the design if you were playing as Silver. And even when you weren't playing as Silver, you could use the physics to your advantage, by knocking enemies into each other as Sonic. And the cars you used as Shadow the Hedgehog absolutely doubled down on the physics. The physics were so terrifying that you had to pay really close attention to what you were doing if you didn't want to wreck yourself, which is not a good thing. The physics in the game for Shadow's vehicles were ridiculously frustrating, but they still served a gameplay purpose, an intentional gameplay purpose. I wonder if anyone's ever completed all of the side missions in Sonic 2006. One time I tried to complete all of the side missions during a playthrough because I just wanted to be really contrarian, because I knew that almost nobody would have done that besides me. But I couldn't stand it. The thing about Sonic 2006 is, although the game isn't good at all, it's perfectly enjoyable. It's not a difficult bad game by any means. There are a couple parts that are reasonably frustrating because you have to wait so long to restart a level, but for the most part the game design is fairly lenient on the player. It's not a difficult game. And I think I've said it before, but broken, terrible games that are easy to play are way better than broken, terrible games that are difficult to play. Sonic 2006 is easy to play, so it's fairly enjoyable. You can just sit back and enjoy how broken and fucking weird it is. That all goes away if you play the side missions. The side missions are not only broken and fucking weird, but they're way too goddamn hard. You know, actually, I'm going to do a little bit of research on this matter. I'm going to see if anyone has 100% of the game on screen, It has to be the whole thing. I don't want to just hear someone telling me they 100%ed it. Look, I refuse your criticism, okay? You can't tell me this shit is off topic. I'm talking about Sonic 2006, and I'm playing Sonic Unleashed. We're still talking about Sonic game design. Okay? It doesn't matter that I haven't talked about the stage's design once yet. Have you seen this stage? What is there to talk about? Like, honestly, I can't think of a single goddamn interesting thing that's happened in this level so far. They introduce a new mechanic shortly, but it's used in such a predictable fashion that talking about it almost feels like an insult. An insult to you, I mean. Anyway, while we were on the topic of side missions and 100%ing Sonic games, it occurs to me how weird it would be to 100% Sonic Unleashed. S-ranking the day stages and night stages serves a purpose, and S-ranking the day stages is just plain fun. But in order to 100% the game, you'd need to grab all those extra items that give you things like soundtracks and concept art, stuff like that. And I think there's a small chance I'll find someone who recorded a 100% run of Sonic 2006 because that game is infamous. But I highly, highly doubt anyone has collected all the concept art and soundtracks in Sonic Unleashed on the PS2 and Wii. Especially since some of them are hidden in the visual novel sections.
That way's blocked by the fire, Sonic. It's too hot to pass through. Do the barrels next to it seem fishy to you? Maybe they've got tuna inside. Sorry.
And on the off chance that I'm wrong and someone did 100% Sonic Unleashed on the PS2 and Wii, I'd like to praise them for defying my expectations and going the extra mile. But I'd also really want to know why they did it, because you don't get anything for it, certainly not more fun, and you can look up all those soundtracks and concept art on the internet now, I'm sure. You know, with my luck, I'm gonna stop recording this, and I'm gonna find 2 Let's Plays. I'm gonna find a 100% Let's Play of Sonic 2006, and a 100% Let's Play of Sonic Unleashed on the PS2 or Wii, and I'll have to spend all night fucking watching those. And you know, it's probably gonna be the same thing it always is with these poor people that do these 100% Let's Plays. They'll have a lot of views on that specific Let's Play, but they'll have really few subscribers, because people only came for that Let's Play, even though the rest of their content is equally high quality. So I'll end up feeling really bad for them. That's always what happens.
How do you like that, huh?
Alright, where are we? Chunon still doing the night stages. This video is gonna be like fucking 40 minutes long. So anyway, this is the stage of the Chunon night stages that I remember the most because, well, you know, it's a mock-up of the Great Wall. I appreciate that the game attempted to give this stage a rather anime name, you know, Path to Darkness. I can always appreciate that, but the stage should reflect that. It's like in Invisimals, one of the, Invisimals The Lost Kingdom, one of the levels is named The Steel Cold Heart of Darkness, and that's really fucking cool and everything, but that game's very, very boring.
What's this weird switch? Think it operates something somewhere?
I mean, yeah, Chip, that's generally what switches do. Do we look stupid? So these, weird switches, as Chip put it, are actually kind of difficult to control. You do twirl the control stick to move them, but you can't twirl it rapidly. You have to twirl it very slowly. And if you don't twirl it slowly enough, then Sonic kind of freaks out. So here's a new enemy type that we haven't seen yet. At least in the werehog sections. We've seen these guys before in the daytime stages. Their whole function here is to blow us off these platforms, or worse, stop us in mid-jump. They are giant fans, after all. We can knock them over with the boxes, which makes it much safer to platform. And that's a decent platforming hazard, but it's a very basic, decent platforming hazard. I would like it if it got more complex as the level went on, like if they reused the idea a few times and made it more interesting each time, ultimately culminating in something genuinely difficult that tested what you learned before. but I believe that's the only time in the game that hazard is used. And if they do use it another time, I can't even remember it, which is not a good sign. And I mean, I recorded this footage fairly recently, so if I'm forgetting something about the design, then that's not on me, that's the game. This isn't a situation where I recorded the game years ago and I'm just now talking over it. In that case, it would be my fault, not the game's fault. Listen to me, do you hear me right now? I'm talking about the possibility of forgetting game design that may or may not actually exist in this game we're currently playing. That is how completely average the level design in this game is. There's so little to talk about here. You know, that reminds me of something. For a while, whenever people would talk to me and say, hey, I wish they made Sonic Unleashed without all those night stages, I would tell them, well, go play Sonic Colors, and lately, go play Sonic Generations. Because there's no doubt that those games are an evolution of the day stages in Sonic Unleashed. They use a lot of similar design, and they definitely use the same mechanics as Sonic Unleashed does. But somewhat lately I've realized that isn't fair of me to say, because the Sonic Unleashed day stages are quite different from Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations. For one thing, the Sonic Unleashed day stages are way fucking faster. They presumably toned down the speed in Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations after complaints that Sonic moves too damn fast in Unleashed. Another big difference is that in Sonic Colors there's far more 2D platforming than in Unleashed. Now they do try to balance the 2D platforming with the 3D platforming fairly well in the day stages in Unleashed, but there's no doubt that in Colors it is way more prevalent. And I believe the level up system from Sonic Unleashed is entirely missing from both Colors and Generations. Sonic no longer goes faster with the more rings he collects. That was an Unleashed exclusive mechanic as well. So anyone who wants to play the Unleashed day stages without the night stages makes a perfectly valid argument. The day stages are really good and have some unique pieces of design that can't be found in any future Sonic games, even if those future games are similar. And I could definitely understand it being thoroughly frustrating that all the great day stages are stuck behind these completely average to mediocre night stages, which don't really add anything to the game, except for length. I've heard some cynical arguments that these night stages were made just to pad the game for length, and that is not practical in the slightest. If you're going to make something to pad for length, it would be something far easier to program that you didn't have to make a ton of original assets for. Especially in the 7th gen version of the game, the argument that the night stages were conceived just for padding, that doesn't have any merit in the slightest. Someone at Sonic Team or higher up at Sega really wanted these night stages to be here, otherwise they, well, wouldn't be here. So back to what we were actually seeing on screen. You can see that there are some floating enemies in the background that will occasionally fire shots at us while we're busy with these other enemies. I did mention earlier in this video that the floating enemies would continually get more use as snipers as the game went on. That's at least one piece of evolving design in the night stages of Sonic Unleashed, and there's not too much of that. Even though there technically isn't any identical design anywhere in the night stages of Sonic Unleashed, it can still feel like a lot of what's here is being reused, especially with the floaty arm platforming. So even though I do commend Demps for not reusing any enemy patterns, you have to try to notice that they aren't reusing enemy patterns, which isn't a good sign. I'm sure they understood a lot about game design. They're Demps after all, they've made quite a few solid titles, but something went very weird with the night stages. Perhaps they just didn't have the time or resources or ideas to make an outstanding 3D action platformer. However, they had plenty of ideas for the day stages. I think the day stages are just as fun as their 7th gen counterparts. Anyway, this is a new enemy type. He has a lot of health and stuff, and he hits harder than everyone else, but I just kind of wailed on him until he fell over. I'm sure there's a way to fight him without getting hit, but it's really hard to care when you don't need to worry about that. Even if we do manage to get defeated sometime, which is a little bit unlikely even without me paying close attention, then we would be revived on the spot. Losing a battle in the night stages would only have a consequence for us if we lost 2 in a row, since we have 2 lives. But basically we have 2 health bars is what I'm saying here, so even if something...
How do you like that, huh?
Welcome to our first werehog boss battle against the Dark Phoenix, and the Dark Phoenix is an easy boss. I mean, yeah, it's really a fucking piece of cake, but compared to the later night stage bosses, this is embarrassingly high quality. The idea is to dodge its attacks a couple of times, and then it'll float around one of these platforms. We throw a water barrel at it, and then we walk back to the center platform and wail on it for a bit. It has a couple of attacks at its disposal. It can shoot its feathers at us, or it can slam into the ground and create a shockwave. Both of these are incredibly easy to avoid, though the feathers are definitely a more interesting obstacle. Because with the shockwave, it's as simple as double jumping, something that you've done in plenty of other platformers where bosses use shockwave attacks, which is many of them. But the feathers, on the other hand, can actually home in on us, so it's best to move behind the platforms and use them as shields to escape from the feathers, which is what I think was intended. You can still avoid them without moving behind the platforms, but it is noticeably more difficult. That being said, even if you get hit by a ton of the feathers, there are rings lying around the arena you can use to heal yourself. So even if you're absolutely terrible at this game, or just phased out and can't force yourself to pay attention anymore, it still shouldn't be a difficult boss battle. You'll notice that now that we've hit the Dark Gaia Phoenix once, it started circling the platform a little bit faster, making it harder for us to aim our barrels. It's anyone's guess why it's circling the platform. It clearly has some element of self-awareness to it, otherwise it wouldn't have started moving faster. So shouldn't it just stop circling the platform altogether? I realize this is a video game boss, and video game bosses need to have weaknesses in order for you to complete the game. But it can't hurt to make the weaknesses make sense. And also, is there a reason it can't recharge its fire while it's flying? Does it have to come into the center platform to recharge its fire? That seems like an incredibly awkward limitation. Not the most important thing, I certainly wouldn't dock the game for something like that, but having in-universe explanations for your boss's behavior can make the game a lot more engaging and make the boss fights a lot more memorable. I highly doubt anyone fondly remembers this boss battle, and I don't think anyone ever will either.
How do you like that, huh?
The moment the temple lit up, the beast woke up. It appears he's come back to his senses.
I see. I'll bet your job is to guard the Chaos Emerald Temple. You must have gone berserk when the emeralds lost their power.
Well, I'm glad you're back. Want some chocolate? So long!
Your dinner, Doctor.
Thank you. What's the progress on the Dark Gaia-powered Eggman Land construction system?
Current status is 27% complete. Progress is significantly behind projected timetable. Presumed cause of delay is Dark Gaia's dispersion across the globe.
Oh, of all the lazy, here I go to the trouble of waking that Dark Gaia thing up, and it causes me nothing but delays.
Dark Gaia had yet to reach maturity within the planet's core, ergo it was still incomplete at the time of its awakening, ergo it was unable to sustain its own weight upon its release, ergo it scattered around the world.
Ugh. I don't want to hear about its weight issues. So what if I gave it a bit of a sudden awakening? This is unacceptable.
Ergo, this is the repercussion of your hasty actions.
What was that? Ugh. I'm having a bad enough day as it is. First that professor runs off with the Gaia manuscripts, and now the planet's coming back together.
That, Doctor, is the result of the power of the Chaos Emeralds, which you discarded along with Sonic. Ergo, another repercussion of your hasty actions.
Quiet, you junkie! That was all part of my plan, part of the big picture. Where's the fun in having my plans succeed without any challenge? Anyway, what's the status of the remaining temples of Gaia?
Eggman forces have currently secured all locations. Defensive preparations are nearly complete.
That'll take care of Sonic for now, which leaves the problem of Dark Gaia. It'd be difficult to collect every piece scattered all across the world.
Searching conventional wisdom banks for topical advice. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Slow and steady wins the race. Nobody likes a whiner.
Isn't there a more efficient way? Some way to, I don't know, gather them all up at once. Wait, that's it, of course! With this, all of my